Welcome back to the Daily Rundown with me, Marc Duffy, and our guests this evening, Kaye and Paul Burgess.
Hello.
Hello. We're talking now about financial assistance from your parents, because it seems the so-called Bank of Mum and Dad will finance 25% of all mortgages in the UK this year. It means that parents are one of the UK's top 10 lenders. They'll lend over £5 billion this year, providing deposits for over 300,000 mortgages and purchasing homes worth up to £77 billion. Not enough houses are being built, which means that there's not enough cheaper housing stock, and it's not a great trend for young people who don't have potential help when searching for a house. At this rate, the first-time buyers will need a £64,000 a year salary to afford a home by 2020. I'm not a homeowner, guys. I do like to admit, I'm a renter. Is that what they call it?
Yeah. Me too.
Yeah. I rent my own property. Do you? You've got your own home. And when did you buy your home?
I bought that. I bought my flat in 2008.
Okay.
That was, I think, thanks to the crash. Basically,
Right.
it was like, it was also. The whole history of it is I had bought somewhere with my ex in Denmark, weirdly, and also when that all kind of finished, that was weirdly how I was able to afford somewhere, is because also the entire world economy tanked. Not really something that I planned, and not something I'd necessarily recommend as a financial strategy, really. Yeah. But it's absolutely kind of the issue. I mean, I think it's really interesting that you said admit. It's still a bit like this idea that's what you're supposed to do if you're a proper person, grown up, is to have your own house and go down.
I do have my own house.
Well, exactly. It's like, and I think that's part of the problem has been this kind of thing. It all goes back to Thatcher and how property owning democracy kind of concept. But actually, that's all we've seen how terribly wrong that's all gone.
What about you, Paul? Is it a choice that you are a renter? If you rent property, or did you have the opportunity, or do you have the opportunity to buy your own home?
No, I come from a family of renters. My mum and dad rented council houses in Oldham from the day they were married until the day they bought their council house, which they got for about £25,000, a 3-bed semi, because they'd been renting for so long. So they took advantage of that scheme. However, my dad was very anti-buying for a lot of years, and that stuck with me. It stuck in my craw. Yet another thing. Your craw is here. So I haven't, and still to this day, I have an aversion to buying in this country, because I really enjoy watching A Place in the Sun. It's one of my favourite programmes on TV. And when you see that people are buying in Spanish coastal towns, they're buying 3-bed properties that are beautiful for what we would, a 3-bed with a pool, detached property in Spain is the same price as what we would pay for a 2-bed terraced in this country. And so I'm always kind of, I rent. I rent, knowing full well that if one of the walls falls down, it's the responsibility of the landlord. To fix it.
I suppose, the option of renting property, you've got that safety net, if you like. If something was to happen to your home, it's someone else that will sort it out for you, and you may pay a little bit more for that, because I mean, I don't know how much average rents do we say between 500 and 700 roughly? Depending on which part of the country you live.
I think in Oldham between 300 and 500 for rental properties. But the crux of this story is people's parents kind of paying their deposit for them. I'm much more in tune with the other 75% of parents that would love to be able to do that for the kids and couldn't ever possibly afford to, because they're hand to mouth, which is, in my opinion, most of us in in the world, in this country anyway. You know, we work, we pay our bills, and having to kind of save up that, because what's the average? £10,000 you've got to put down to get a mortgage these days. I'm sure most parents out there would love to be financially stable enough and have enough savings to be able to say to their kids, if you want to move out, we're going to help you to buy your own place. But I don't think most can.
No.
Well, this is the issue. I mean, this story does come with a bit of a health warning, because it comes from, also says the guy from the think tank, and saying, well, watch out for the stories that come from think tanks. Actually, in terms of the figure that's mentioned, which is 5 billion, is actually just a very small amount of yearly mortgages. Last year it was 220 billion. So something's kind of happened here to make a bit of a splash. I think basically it's about 25% of mortgages have some input from parents. But that doesn't take away from that point, because it's still absolutely about inherited inequality.
Yeah.
And this is only going in the wrong direction, because we can see this also increasingly in terms of affordable housing. This is a major issue in London, for example, but also increasingly in cities like Liverpool or Manchester, Leeds, where also prices are inflating hugely in the centre. And also when you're talking about also that important rung that people need to help them in terms of like social housing, councils saying we have no possibility to do anything about this, particularly in the centre. I mean, so at the moment, I mean, I know in Manchester, for example, is that councils have been trying to say, well, we'd really like to have social housing here. But as soon as you're talking about doing it in the centre of the city, developers say, well, there's no way we can make this work. Yeah. So it's also that this inherited inequality is only getting worse with housing, and it's a huge problem in terms of for people's lives, but the economy too, because everybody has to move out. But then you can't afford the public transport to get into the city, to get to decent jobs. It's all of that.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously, house prices and flats and whatever, they vary drastically,
massively,
don't they?
Yeah.
Up and down the country, they vary drastically. We see quite a lot of these property shows on the television, people investing in other parts of the country to make the pound go further. What are your thoughts on that? Is it right that someone who may be from out of town with a bit of money behind them go and buy up property?
I think a lot of people,
they could be saved for. I
think a lot of people who are genuine first-time buyers buy with that in mind. They don't buy a permanent property. They buy a property that they know over a 5 or 10 year period they can do up the kitchen and the bathroom, have the windows replaced, do the garden, and perhaps make 40, 50 grand on top of what they paid for it. Yeah. It's that whole kind of moving up the ladder. The massive inequalities come at the start of that process, don't they? Because could you, Mark, and we're friends, we can talk openly, could you afford a £10,000 deposit now on a house?
Probably not. Probably I'll have to ask the bank of mum and dad to help me. Probably.
And it would take me a few years to
save that up.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So therefore, however, us paying rent is in fact dead money, because if we work it out, how much have we paid in rent for the last decade?
More than a mortgage.
Exactly.
Anyway, we'll move on, guys. Thanks very much for that, though. We'll move on to this story now that might get Paul riled, because I do know him. A number of government ministers and civil service officials are benefiting from their time in being in office by moving to lucrative jobs in the private sector, and some are going on to work in the same industry sectors that they once regulated while in government. Analysis by the Daily Mail showed that despite rules against the use of insider information, hundreds of former civil servants are cashing in on highly paid jobs with private firms, despite previous promises of action by David Cameron on the issue. My opener there is: does it sound a bit fishy? People who are like. For example, I will give you a prime example. One person who has gone on to be in the same industry, if you like, is the previous Secretary to the Treasury, Danny Alexander, under the coalition government, working in the Treasury. He's then since and gone for working in an investment bank.
Oh, is he the guy that's the vice president of some Chinese?
Yeah, of a Chinese.
Yeah.
Could that be seen as, if you know in the inside information, being a benefit to that organisation?
What insider information could you know, though, that you could take? Because we live in a constantly evolving and changing economy. So what you knew in a job you did 5 years ago isn't necessarily going to be relevant to the financial structure of the world now, is it?
Well, I think that's one. Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the reasons. Well, one of the things that's been sort of proposed is that there should be a sort of cooling off period.
Yes.
Because I think that's absolutely right. It's also saying, well, things change and things change quite quickly these days. So the idea of perhaps there's a kind of couple of years in which you couldn't go into a job that was actually kind of similar to where you'd come from, and they're going, I don't know, Danny Alexander. I mean, just go and have a rest, mate, and then just get a job down Tesco's or something, and then go and do it. But it's like I think part of it is that also people look at somebody like kind of Danny Alexander, who, bless him, is kind of difficult to tell apart from Beaker at the best of times. But it's like, I think they tend to look at the say, wait a minute, I think there's another element to it, which is like saying, we voted you out, and also because we think you're pretty mediocre, really. Yeah. And I think stick in the craw.
Without doing character assassination.
It's like, but what it's about is also people asking the question of going, feeling like there's that people have benefited. It's part of that nagging doubt about
to an organisation, though. So an investment bank is just one example of that. But to an organisation, somebody who's worked in the field, got all this experience, they're like, much sought after. As an organisation, if say, for example, an investment bank, and Paul, you've been in government for the last 5 years, in Treasury, I'm going to want you working for me, aren't I?
Yeah, and that's the thing that I don't necessarily see that there's a problem with it, because taking it from a completely different angle, had I worked for DEFRA, Department for Environment, Farming and Rural Affairs.
Yes.
And then I got offered a job in Greenpeace, working for the environmental section of Greenpeace. That would be beneficial to them, to me,
yes, and
to the world, because Greenpeace do a lot to kind of, combat climate change and stuff. So unless there's some kind of thing that you can take from your previous job, and I mean it's a whole murky, how do you police it? How do you make sure that nobody takes the skills they've learned in government and goes into the private sector and uses those skills? You can't really police that, can you?
Well, I think that is the question. It's also, but what are we actually asking to happen? I mean, I think probably the best remedy to this is also saying being more transparent about how government works. I think that's the thing, because if people are feeling that there are sort of dodgy secrets, or there are things that's been kept back from the public that they can take advantage for, also personal financial gain rather than gain from the world, which is what you're talking about. I think that's what concerns people. But if government itself is more open about how it works, how it does trade deals, all of that, then I think that's probably the route to go down with this. It's also not particularly trying to police what individual people do in terms of their occupations, but it's also about how government functions. I think that's really what the heart of this, as far as I think.
Again, Loz, we'll leave it there. Some great stories today, but we will take another quick break, so do join us again in a few minutes.